Hi, this is Paul. Britt Hartley has provoked some interesting responses this morning on Twitter. Nate Heil, who is known to go off, writes, "Who the hell is this person, and why is PVK ruining my day with this? She looks and sounds like the head of HR. Nothing she says is coherent, and her fake niceness makes me loathe her even more. I found this woman to be most frustrating to listen to than anyone in recent memory. You have poisoned all of this by sharing this incoherent nonsense. Nothing she says makes any sense at all. I quite seriously prefer tea grog atheism to this nonsense. How does she have any following?" But she does have a following. She has a pretty significant following. She's got a big following on TikTok, which sort of makes sense. I listened to more of the Rainn Wilson Soul Boom podcast, and I had a lot of, I thought, yeah, there's some real coherence issues in this, and we're probably going to talk about some of that as we go through this. But that's, of course, Nate was one response, and see, this is why I read the comments, because, and this is why the corner. I mean, the value of the corner, I mean, there's always comments like, this corner is incoherent, or this corner is BS. But the purpose of the corner and the size of the corner are so that we can hear each other. And the differences of responses from known persons is what gives this value. So here's Rod Hare, which I found to be super interesting because, oh, come on, enlarge. There we go. Rod says, Luke shared that video from Rainn Wilson and Britt Hartley with me as well. I found her highly persuasive. Now, in all fairness to Luke, he said that he had listened to the Rhett and Link conversation with her and found her more annoying. Chad made the really important, I think, interesting comment of, she sounds very much like many of us alcoholics in recovery. It's like spiritual hovering with intellectual tethering. I thought that was, Chad is just this super intuitive. And intuition, again, is really important. Yesterday I played this clip, well, depending on when I put this out, depending on how many videos I make. But on the Public Spirits video, I played this clip of Kate Thomas, who, so for a secular society, you have to call it like the intuition industry. And that's super helpful labeling to figure out some of what's going on around someone like Britt Hartley. And she clearly has found her audience. I responded, I found her articulations lack memory of themselves. In other words, she says things which, if you sort of line them up, they don't really cohere very well, but we're all we're all guilty of that. She gives a strong vibe, and don't pay too close attention to the words, which is this comment that she made about God just blew me away. The whole Rainn Wilson podcast, I haven't listened to the whole thing, but it's proving to be a very interesting podcast. So there's a there. It's just trying to figure out what that there is. So let's listen to this. She basically says, once you say God is or God does, then I'm out. That's the kind of atheist she is. But if we can all walk into a cathedral and say God is here, or God, as Rainn Wilson is in this episode of The Office.
I was always reading, though. I was always reading theology and philosophy. At that point, I was teaching Mormon seminary, which is a paid position. I was teaching scripture and really loved doing what we would call nuanced Christianity, kind of like Brian McLaren kind of Christianity. You just so perfectly defined the spiritual crisis that we're in and the meaning crisis, and I was just eating it up. And then I felt like you went somewhere where I couldn't go. And the question that I've wanted to ask you since then is that if your atheist phase, and then we can go wherever you want for the rest of the interview. This is really my only question that I've had for you, is if your atheist phase had a more spiritual root in it. Mm-hmm. So my atheism has a Sufi teacher that I meet with regularly. It has mysticism, and it has psychedelics, and it has meaningful work, and it has purpose, and it has service, and it has contemplation, and it really has all of the aspects of religion that I have cultivated into my life. And so it's a thriving form of spiritual atheism. Do you feel like if your atheism had more spirituality to it, that phase, like, because when you talk about your atheism, it's an emptiness, and for me, it's not an emptiness. It's very much a wholeness. And so I wonder if your atheist phase had spirituality in it, would it have been so empty for you?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. And I think even in the early 90s, one would have been hard pressed to find a single spiritual atheist.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
On the planet. So I didn't have those kind of resources. And one of the things that there's so much I despise about contemporary society and social media and how everything is working and falling apart. And it's this madcap, roller coaster of, short attention span fever. But there's a lot of resources out there for young people. And I know that young folk have found you and your channels online and your book to be incredibly revitalizing. And this idea that, hey, you can have spiritual practices, rituals, depth, meaning without a God, without a soul, without any kind of greater spirit beyond kind of the material. And I think that, I don't know. For me at 20 or 21, maybe that would have. Maybe that would have worked for me. I think for me, as you know, because you read the book, and thank you for reading it, the essential question then, as it wasn't sitting right, was like, well, is there a God? And that was kind of a very long journey about trying to figure out if there was a God, and how does one figure that out? I mean, you can get PhDs and you can intellectualize all you want, but I heard you say in an interview, I heard you talk about love as an experience of love. And of course, David Bentley Hart has the book, The Experience of God. And like, how do you experience God? Do you experience the divine? And how exactly does that work? And that's when I talked about this idea of Wakantanka from the Lakota Sioux tradition, and how revelatory that was to think about God completely devoid from any kind of persona or human qualities, and being far more contained in kind of the miracle and mystery of nature than in any kind of like superhero or demiurge or anything like that. So that, for me, that was the turning point where I was like, okay, I can get with that. And that's kind of where at that age I built my foundation, and it still, for me, holds up.
And that's a place where you and I will combine, even though we'll probably differ in maybe some of the words that we'll use. Like, you'll be much more liberal with your use of the word God than I will. But for me, even as an atheist, if someone walks into a cathedral and there's stained glass and there's music playing, it's beautiful, and someone says, "I feel God here," that's an experience. They're using a mouth sound God to describe what they're feeling. And even to this day, if someone were to say that, I would say, "I feel God here too," because now we're just using a word to share an experience, a shared experience that we're having. But then when someone says God says this, or is this, or does this, or whatever, okay, that's different. That's a truth claim that we're making, about God in the nature of the universe, and that's where I'm going to be much more skeptical or wary of using that word. But that word of "I feel God here," I have no problem as an atheist saying that, because that's an experience that is permeated in my life.
I think that's a quote from The Office. "I feel God in this Chili's tonight."
That's right. That's right.
So Pam was right.
Maybe Pam was right all along.
She felt God in the chili.
Pam the theologian was onto something.
So the minimalism, simplification, organizing part of YouTube is a pretty good section. There's a woman who has a channel called Clutterbug, which has over 1 million subs. I mean, it's quite a decent channel. And Nate If you think I ruined yesterday, wait till you see what I do with today. You've been warned. So she has sort of a behind the scenes thing here, and we'll see what happens with this music. Hopefully not too much. So
Crew, they're here to save the day, organizing chaos in the quirky way, decluttering closets while the kids run wild, saving hives of bees with a big old smile. She's a mom, she's a firefighter, she's a beekeeper, a late night rider. ADHD keeps her spinning around, but she's the best declutterer in town.
Sorry I'm late. Stuck in traffic? It's funny because I work in my basement.
So she has this big declutter channel, and then I came across this, and this has everything to do with religion, because I know my little shortcut of the definition of religion is that which is highest and how to get there. This is a super interesting. This is the end of this talk that she gives. Oh, Nate, you're just gonna hate me.
Discipline. I had a medical condition, and I would never shame a diabetic because they have to take insulin. So why would I shame my...
Now this also has to do a little bit with Chad's comment about recovery, because of course this move of alcoholism being pivoted from a moral failure or evidence of lack of moral sufficiency into a modernist medical framing is a critical element of not only sort of the development of AA, but also what would come in the later 20th and beginning of the 21st century.
Myself for not having executive function, right? It gave me grace. It gave me self-love. It gave me forgiveness. It gave
Grace, self-love, forgiveness. These are sort of these spirituality words.
me a new perspective because suddenly all the crap I've been told my whole life was a bad thing. My impulsivity, I looked at it differently. My impulsivity means I'm never afraid to try new things. I'll jump into anything. You're like, let's go jump out of a plane, Kay. Let's do it. You know, it means I didn't let failure or embarrassment get in my way. My hyperactivity, yes, it can be annoying, but also hyper-focus means I can do things 10 times faster than other people when I'm passionate about it. My dislike of the mundane, same old, yeah. But that means I'm always trying new systems. I'm always looking for a shortcut. I'm always like, there's gotta be a better way. And that has led to like, what? Amazing things. And my lack of structure means that I didn't have to like, stop it. I didn't have to learn to run on a hamster cage. I just had to get out, right? I'm not running on the wheel. I just had to get out of the cage. So now I just have to go past that or I'm gonna cry. But I have like the coolest life. And I know a lot of ADHD experts will say it's not a superpower, it's a disability. F that. You know, sorry. It is a gift, and I am grateful. And yes, we need tools, and we have to learn how to manage the crappy stuff, but when we embrace the good, when we change our mindset and realize it makes us effing awesome, that's when everything changes inside of you. When you look at yourself differently. So if you were a child who struggled in a system, or you know of a child who's struggling, or you're an adult struggling in a place where we're rewarded for sitting still and being quiet and memorizing. What? Stupid. You're not annoying, dumb, lazy, or bad. The system is the problem. Yeah. We just need a different system. So what I want to say to you is, like, maybe you haven't found your passion, but you...
And of course, if you're at all attuned to the quasi-religions that are moving around, and of course there's definitely a male-female difference going on here as well. But, find your passion, discover your purpose. This is basic stuff that you'll get at motivational speakers, and in a lot of ways, sort of the declutter, house cleaning, that whole side of YouTube is in some ways sort of a motivational area. Men are being motivated to make lots of money and get lots of hot chicks and drive fast cars, and women are being motivated to be the perfect mom and have the nice household and figure out how it works and organize, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, all these other things like neurodiversity and all those things will sort of come in. But in what way is this not religious?
You have one, okay? Keep looking. That thing that lights you up, that thing that you want to do when your phone is dead, okay? The thing that, makes you feel like, yes, that's your purpose. Channel your superpowers into positive things. Drugs and alcohol is bad. Drugs and alcohol is bad. Crime bad. Positive things. And you can create a life that neurotypical people could only dream of. Thank you.
So, and to me, I saw that, I was like, oh, this is so interesting. I get in trouble when I do this because Job had sent me a video of a woman in the tech space who sort of did a very similar thing when she got on stage. And she basically leveled the same religion at, this tech audience, and I just sort of deconstructed it. And of course she saw it and was not happy. And I don't know if any of these other places on YouTube will be happy. And of course, men and women are going to see this and listen to this in a very different way. So again, this is, of course, the money clip.
More liberal with your use of the word God than I will. But for me, even as an atheist, if someone walks into a cathedral and there's stained glass and there's music playing, it's beautiful, and someone says, I feel God here, that's an experience. They're using a mouth sound God to describe what they're feeling. And even to this day, if someone were to say that, I would say, I feel God here too. Because now we're just using a word to share an experience, a shared experience that we're having.
So that word God is something that we use to share an experience. And Nate, with all due respect, Nate, that is how a lot of people use the word. That simply is. And it might frustrate you, it might make you angry, and I can completely understand it, but and the rest just, follow your passions, religion is a very transjective thing. Now, at some point we'll have to get into the question of this other word, spirituality, but Brendan Graham Dempsey, who made the rounds not too long ago, has a little meaning crisis series. And when I listened to this and thought about the Brett Hartley thing going around, it was like, wow, this just really tracks.
Meaning crisis is something I've experienced personally. And maybe others watching this can relate if they've had a similar experience, but one example is if you lose your faith. I grew up in a very conservative evangelical Christian house, and that was my meaning. That was my frame of making sense of the world, was through that story and those symbols and that general framework. And when I then went on to study that and started digging into the history, the archaeology, kind of critically probing this story that I was using to make meaning of the world, I hit a wall. I had my own crisis, a crisis of faith. And the consequences of that were a feeling of just utter disorientation, a sense of vertigo. It's like you don't really know which way is up, which way is down, because your whole frame for contextualizing your experience and your reality has now disappeared, and you're kind of just falling. And those markers or milestones to make sense of things no longer are there. So like if a question comes up, is this good? Is this bad? Well, you can't really go to the Bible anymore and just sort of like find some easy verse that will then give you the answer. You're kind of uncertain. And there's a whole set of ways of potentially answering those questions or interpreting things. And this person has this view, and this person has this view, and there's this religion and this worldview. So it's just this profound sense of kind of paralysis, because you don't really know how to decide what to do, what's good, what's right, what's of value. And so I experienced that in that context as a profound meaning crisis. And that's one way that can happen for people, where they can kind of deconstruct from their meaning-giving frame. But it doesn't have to be just religion. It could be any number of ways that people have experienced that, of working with a particular model of reality and then just having that kind of kicked out from under them. And I think that experience is what we kind of collectively, in some ways, are going through. It's a challenge for us to be able to make sense of our experience, to have a frame in which we can orient ourselves and say, relative to this is good, this is bad, this is what I want, this is what I don't want, this would be the direction I want to move in, and this is the direction I want to move away from. Instead, there's just this sense of a kind of infinite possibility with nothing either good or bad, and the kind of radical confusion that comes from that. So, yeah.
And I think he articulated it very well, and especially this sort of radical openness. And in the, people face two dilemmas. One dilemma is obstacles, and the other dilemma is freedom, and both of them have to be dealt with. And so, how do you go from one to the other? Now, part of what made Luke so excited about this interview.
How do we know there's a God, or is it more like
No.
a Joseph Smith kind of thing?
Not even that yet. So like the beginning of it was this pamphlet came out. It was called the For Strength of Youth pamphlet. And it was like from God to the prophet to teenagers. So this is like directly from God, what teenagers need to know. And I'm like, man.
Now it's really helpful to remember that the LDS Church is very much a prophetic church. They have a level of the prophets in their church have a great deal of power to rewrite. They have a great deal of power. I'll just say it that way.
Made
Fantastic.
pamphlets, yeah.
God's making a pamphlet for me as a teenager. Life is hard. I'm trying to figure out who I am and the world and all this. This is fantastic. God's got a pamphlet for me.
Mm-hmm.
And the pamphlet is like, don't drink coffee and don't swear and don't get tattoos and lots of do's and don'ts. And I'm like, the creator of the universe, like this is all you got for me? And it was really troubling for me.
Now what's interesting here is that the list is always interesting because you have relevance realization. Because if God says, don't be Jeffrey Epstein or don't be Adolf Hitler, oh yeah, those clearly have authority, but don't get tattoos and drink coffee. No, those are frivolous. So you've already got your own relevance realization going on here. And so part of what's going on here is this is actually the second version of this, because every now and then I didn't press record. And I'm sitting there talking to the computer. I'm talking all to myself because nothing's being recorded. And it's a wholly dissatisfying experience when it happens. But when you're a sixth grader, you're this little ideologue. You're this little rule follower, generally speaking. That's sort of your developmental level. And you want the map and you want the rules. And you're so excited that this gets into what I was talking about with respect to the disenchantment, reenchantment, Rod Dreher stuff. It's all the idea that I want to find out how the world really works. And so she starts already to doubt the prophets. And, well, why? Well, now, of course, for a young person, she might look at it and say, hey, drinking coffee, that doesn't seem like such a bad thing. What's wrong with caffeine? And, of course, pretty soon it's going to be sex, I assume, with a boyfriend or something like that. She's going to talk about that. And it doesn't seem so harmless. And this is where you have this interchange of... I didn't watch it, but I didn't watch all of it. I watched some of it, but what's his name? Did a video on authority that came through Climbing Mount Sophia. Why can't I think of his name? Roman Catholic scholar from D.C. Works in the John Paul Institute. He's done these videos on authority lately, and some people get really excited about it. Yeah, what we need is authority. Well, here she had an authority, and she had an entire community around her, and they were looking at that authority. But this is where pluralism gets into the mix, because, someone might say that the serpent sneaks up and says, did God really say you should not have caffeine? And of course, Protestants sort of camp on this and say, we've got the book. We're not going to listen to these prophets sort of working the book.
And that's just a very basic question of like, how do I know that the prophet's talking to God? Because this is really just like a list of random things that you're supposed to do and don't. And that's...
And again, random. But it's so funny now that we're in this environment of all kinds of other things happening. I mean, you might have, if Huberman says, don't drink coffee, you might say, he speaks as one with authority, because like he can juggle like 4 girlfriends.
It's meaningless, and why does God care so much about what word I say when I stub my toe? So just like really simple questions.
And why does God not want us to get tattooed?
Now, and what's going to wind up, of course, as she goes here is eventually she's going to find spirituality and those things, and she's going to need practices. And of course, all of her practices are do and don't things, but there's all this scaffolding behind them that says, I really should live in community, and I really should, maybe, I have no idea what her program is, but most of these programs aren't tremendously insightful or creative. Because, well, I'm going to listen to this Sufi, and I'm going to listen to... And it's really interesting because, of course, she had a conversation with John Vervaeke, and who has pretty much discarded the religion that's not a religion. She seems to sort of still be in the religion that's not a religion phase, in that, well, I'm here at the buffet table of Christian practices, and I'll take some of this and take some of that. Well, that tattoo thing, well, that's just doesn't make any sense. And the caffeine thing, well, but maybe the caffeine thing, because, it's what I put in my body. And if Andrew Huberman says I shouldn't drink caffeine because that interrupts my sleep cycle, then, well, maybe the caffeine thing does make sense. Those Hebrews didn't eat pork, and now we know about trichinosis, and so ancient wisdom and organic foods, and so, but what you wind up in many cases is that this problem of pervasive pluralistic interpretation that Christian Smith talks about when in his little book, The Bible Made Impossible. And this doesn't just have to do with the Bible. And so very quickly you have questions of, okay, communities with authority, but she's already sort of bucked this one authority. So which authority will feel compelling on the inside? And now we can get into this culture of authenticity. Which authority will feel authentic to you? So spoiler alert. So because it's just so interesting, because on one hand, there's no there beyond evidence and stuff. Yeah, spirituality, which is sort of an intuitional finding your way through a veiled system and landscape beneath what we see in appearance. And this is where the great inconsistency sort of lands, in that well, maybe we'll talk about the nihilism.
You live, you die. There's no real purpose.
I was
There's
thinking
no,
about the nihilists from The Big Lebowski.
yeah. So, yeah, there's some good nihilist characters in movies over the years. But yeah, so for me, it just, my brain just shut down, and I was very depressed. And it wasn't a depression that like, oh, you just need some sunshine and some friends. Like, it was deeply suicidal. And for those who don't want to hear that part, this was where maybe you skip this episode, or because I'm just gonna be honest about that time in my life. I really so completely dissociated that I woke up and just every day I was like a video game character that had no meaning and purpose, and it's all stupid. But other people in this game care about this character. So I'll just kind of like pretend to be human and pretend to be Brittany because these people care about me. But all of this is stupid. All of this is meaningless. There's no point in this. It would be better to never have been born. I wanted to die. I had a lot of suicidal ideation.
And of course, she's a woman, so Jordan Peterson as Exorcist wasn't really probably as available to her. But that, of course, is when you go through all the early Randos conversations I did on the channel. Many people, they heard Jordan Peterson, he sort of broke that spell in them, and then they could find, let's say, the landscape beneath the appearances. But
I had children, and so and
the children are a big part of this because she loves the kids, and mommy's clearly not doing well, and she loves her kids enough not to just sit there and become a wine mom and drink herself to death, or neglect and abuse and all those things. So she's gonna, she's gonna pull herself together. And how's she gonna do this?
that pulled me back from the worst of those thoughts. And really at the root of it, the deepest thought that I had that I couldn't get out of was, if there's no purpose and the universe doesn't know that we're here and everything suffers.
Now that universe doesn't know that we're here to be seen, to be validated. I mean, this is such a powerful thing that religions afford. And so when you sort of kick the legs out from under the religion, that nihilism just comes right up.
And we're just products of evolution, and there's no free will. And to live, you know, other conscious life has to die in order for you to live, even when you're vegan. Then I'm just a machine of violence, and it would actually be more moral to take my own life than to be alive.
Wow,
And of course, I mean, this is also a product of a certain moral landscape which had been pushed. And one of the best articulations of that was Wilfred McClay's The Strange Persistence of Guilt, where just to be a human being, even, and this is where the inconsistencies come out, because, hey, if you're a real nihilist, who cares about your kids? Who cares about what other people think about you? But she can't duck that, and glad she can't, especially for the sake of her kids. And she cares about the world as if the world is something to care for. And these are where all these little funny little inconsistencies, and mercifully so. We don't want her sort of throwing all those away.
That's really dark.
It's very dark. And I was stuck in that for about 2 years. And because my brain had just lost every kind of foundation, because when your foundation is built on God and you lose that, you lose more than just beliefs. I lost every, the reason nihilism.
Now it's interesting, when your foundation is built on God. Now this is sort of a bone that I have to pick with Justin Brierley's project too. Whereas on one hand, God does work as this sort of shorthand for lots of stuff, maybe everything, maybe universe, maybe, but she quite willingly, at least at this phase of her reconstruction, I mean, one of the first things that people, if they're really going to leave nihilism, and I think about our friend Jared, the church critic, if you're really gonna leave nihilism, one of the things that the first thing that sort of seems to recover is that there is a landscape, there is a floor to the ocean. The top of the ocean might look just chaos and storms, but underneath, there's something beneath it. Now, those of you following Rough Draft for Sunday know I'm preaching through the book of Revelation, and I'm up to chapter 12, where we have a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain. She was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its head. On its heads, its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that it might devour her child the moment she was born. She gave birth to a child, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. And anybody who's ever read any New Testament quotations of Psalm 2 knows who this is. And her child was snatched up to God and to his throne, and the woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragons and his angels fought back, but he was not strong enough, and so they lost their place in heaven. And this goes on and on and on, of course. And then what's interesting about this little tidbit of the sermon is that both the woman, the king of heaven, the male child, they all have their proxies on earth. Now, Satan is thrown to earth, and there's probably some Nero and Roman Empire in this. We'll give the preterists their due. But there's also patterns, and because what happens in Rome isn't unlike other patterns that will happen in the world. And so even just the recognition of patterns, the nihilism sort of gives way to spirituality. And again, you see this when you look at the emerging church trajectory. And what's interesting is that some people just sort of get stuck along the way. Maybe we call that stuckness toll houses. Doom, 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 doom. They get stuck along the way, and they can't, but she's, on a trajectory. And so, why does she have a YouTube following? Because in some ways, the story is so common. So common. Well, it's because people look for people who have stories like their own, because they're looking for guides, and they're looking for wisdom, and they're trying to find a way through. And so, YouTube is just now full of talk and sharing, and his experience with the Baha'i faith, which is the Baha'i. I remember my friend Neil telling me about the Baha'i, because for a while he was sort of enchanted by the Baha'i. He had gotten sober through 12 steps, and then because the Baha'i seems to try to find a way through the pluralism, but you've always got this problem of patterns above and specificity below, and how do you actually bring these things together? And so at some point, you're going to want to, let's go a little further here.
Unlike your major was atheism, and then your minor was no free will.
It's more of a train that kept going for me. So for a lot of people, deconstruction is really healthy in the sense that you should deconstruct narratives that were given to you, and that's healthy. For me, that was a train that...
Because that's exactly what this other rather undeconstructed narrative in American culture, this other church says, is find your own truth. And then there's a degree of, individuality and individualization to that, but that also has cultural footnotes too.
Kept going until there was nothing left. And any idea or handhold or concept about the universe, I just had lost all of that. So for me, that I just never stopped that bulldozer until I was just essentially naked to the universe with nothing. And that's not common.
And how did that end up with no?
It's not uncommon, but it's also part of the part of the deconstruction myth is emptiness. And part of what, I first heard it through Tim Keller, but others have noted it before, is that you're not really sort of shedding, you're exchanging. You're exchanging one set of religious beliefs, one set of assumptions and faith assumptions for others.
No free will.
Just like reading and studying that concept in neuroscience. I'm not like
Sam. Maybe you read and studied Sam. Sam's wife will get a mention a little bit later in the show.
if we do have free will, that's great news. Like I don't have my identity wrapped around like
Right.
we for sure don't have free will.
Yeah.
I'm not even really a missionary for that idea. I don't think it's
But she definitely thinks she has agency.
Is for you.
Yeah.
So you're kind of just in this, you kind of go through your life not kind of actively making choices because there's a puppet master behind you. But on both cases, there's a puppet.
Oh, this is his read of Calvinism relating to the whole show.
Master. One is the mechanism.
world that may increase in morality when that happens, but it's also because of how we've built up morality. We've built up morality to mean we do this thing because God says so in heavens and hells and all of that. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. The argument against that would be
But yet, of course, she feels guilty about taking up space on planet Earth and even being a vegan. So where did that morality come from? It came from somewhere. Didn't come from nowhere. You didn't just get it by, being born. All these things come from somewhere.
that
University where he taught. I didn't take his classes, my friend did, but essentially his theory, as far as I understand it, is that consciousness is a kind of a filling in of the gap. We are in this uncomfortable chair having this awesome conversation and remembering kissing my wife when I left the house.
thing about being an atheist is that you just don't have to because atheism is a negation, right? Like
Yeah,
it
it's just
doesn't say
saying there's
anything,
no-
right?
there's
Like,
no force behind
all it says is I'm not convinced of a theistic God. That's all atheism that can say.
Yeah.
So the great thing about that is that I can explore
Is that really all there is to that package? Again, I don't think so. But she's putting her package together. We all put our package together in one way or another. We inherit stuff, we look at stuff, we receive stuff. But then, of course, spirituality will come in, and that'll be a feeling. But she definitely has some trust that her feelings and her instincts and her intuitions somehow relate with something real enough to save her life from just ending her life. Now one often asks, in the midst of this, it's funny because she'll talk about Viktor Frankl and some other person that I hadn't heard of with respect to, being in a prison camp and things like this. And it's just, I'm more on the incoherent side with Nate than I am on the rod here. He said he connected with her, but why? Because there's not nothing there to connect with, because clearly lots of people are connecting there. John Vervaeke has started to release his Silk Road videos, and so he basically gives Bishop Maximus a platform to present his paper, and Bishop Maximus goes through it. And what was fascinating to me was him using Clement of Alexandria to basically articulate a certain presuppositionalism. And of course, anybody who knows anything about Dutch Calvinism knows that Dutch Calvinism and some of the philosophical people within that tradition, of course, you've got Van Til, but then much later, Alvin Plantinga. When Alvin Plantinga talks about belief in God as being basic, he's basically making a presuppositionalist move. What do I mean by presuppositionalism? I mean that faith is the beginning of these things. You have a faith in something, and it might be in that feeling that sort of connects you and others, that we'll use the word God for that feeling when we're all together. And okay, fair enough. And so, it was quite interesting because John held his comments to the end, and was very interesting how John responded to the presuppositionalism.
Become the practice of voluntary necessity.
Yes.
It's at that realization and love and reason and beauty and the flow state and moral obligation. And we also seem to, right, we seem to have a terrific confidence that these are the, I don't know what to call them, the entities that give us the greatest chance of connecting to what is most real.
Absolutely.
All right. And then the other question was, what does that mean about reality such that whatever this is, right, fits to it? Okay?
Now, part of what was interesting about this was thinking about sort of the new atheist saw of faith is belief without evidence. And it's not really a great definition of faith, partly because they want to sort of use faith in the chair I'm sitting on and faith in God in a religious framework as being identical. They are connected. I have good evidence that this chair will hold me. I have hours of sitting in it. And also I'd had experience with lots of other similar structures, and you can get on it to test it, and so on and so forth. But the presuppositionalism basically says that there are priors which are often unseen, upon which you're actually building your system. And I think that's very true of this Britt Hartley question, because she just tends to be not very aware of her priors. She's got some of them, but there are others, and that it's not so much a matter of stripping away of there being nothing. Because you would imagine that if theism is just a product of propaganda or something like that, you would imagine that there wouldn't be so much of it in the ancient world. And atheism being simply the absence of something, but the only way you can hold a vacuum is a container. And so atheism is just the negation of something, of the absence. It's sort of like saying, I have vacuum in my hand. And it'd be like, no, atheism is probably more akin to the glass out of which you have tried to evacuate the air so you can assert the vacuum within.
I think you've given me the answer to the first question. I want to propose to you that faith is exactly the sense that can become the practice of voluntary necessity.
Yes.
It's at the heart of all of these: relevance, realization, reason, love, beauty, flow, normative obligation.
Yes.
Okay. And then
that's presuppositionalism. You don't get started without nothing. And it's also sort of the frame problem. And it's why when Brendan Graham Dempsey and Britt Hartley talk about this collapse, which is the meaning crisis, this collapse of a system that, well, there needs to be other. Now, where does this faith come from? Now, I'm a Calvinist, and so I say, well, it comes from God. Well, what do you mean by God? Well, God number one and God number two. Because there's so much that is simply given and given to us.
And why is that disclosing? Like, why do we put faith in it? And by the way, I'll note that pragmatism and the arguments that people are usually offering for induction are pragmatist arguments. And pragmatism is just arguments about relevance. Right?
Yes,
right.
yes.
You're right.
Which are not irrelevant arguments.
No. This is my second point. Unlike James, who I think confuses them, we must keep truth and relevance distinct from each other because they are foundational opponent processes. We use truth to correct relevance, and we use relevance to correct truth.
Which I think is a tremendous insight and really helpful. And part of the deconstruction, because for the 16-year-old saying, okay, no caffeine, go to temple, no sex with your boyfriend outside of marriage, etc., etc. And it says, yeah, but that doesn't seem to. Yeah, but you might not think that way when you're 50. And the 16-year-old can't do that. And so, then we're back to these crises of institutions. And we'll play a little bit more, and then we'll jump to the next thing.
Which is why I think that Clement's way of approaching this, I think, harmonizes the main epistemological theories of foundationalism, coherentism, and pragmatism.
And virtue
It puts them all together and shows how they all...
That's what I'm trying to do with this argument. That's
Right.
exactly what I'm trying to do with this argument, exactly what you're saying. And then, because there's something like this, we won't go down this side pathway. I'm just mentioning it to give due credit. Because Spinoza has this very challenging claim that truth is its own standard. Right? That anything you'd use to try and establish truth requires a sense of truth, and therefore we have to have some sort of direct sense of truth.
Right.
And there's a lot of people that sort of, I think the problem is a lot of people are wrestling with this and they're trying to impose a representational theory, and that what Spinoza actually has is a conformity epistemology, a contact epistemology.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, regardless of how that scholastic debate lands. I want to say that even if I'm wrong, I want to give credit to Spinoza for inspiring this thought.
Okay, and as long as we're giving credit to outside sources, I have to note that one of the quotes that Clement uses, he's actually quoting the Epicureans, who normally are the enemy and who are the object of every form of abuse from all other philosophers, as being hedonists. But in this particular case, Clement cites Epicurus as being correct in his assertion of assent and the relationship of the mind to the acceptance of external reality.
No, Rome was a noisy city. Now, thanks to Grim Grizz on Twitter, I caught this little gem.
The Cartesian crisis, which I've described many times. The Cartesian crisis is the state in which your certainty over what's taking place is low quality, right? Did COVID come from the wild? Did it come from a lab? Are the vaccines safe and effective? Are they highly dangerous gene therapies that have been disguised as vaccines to get you to take them? You don't know what to believe across many different topics. And this is largely downstream of the fact that much of what we come to understand about the world is now intermediated by screens and authority. Some authority comes up with some conclusion. You are fed that conclusion through some screen. You don't necessarily know what you're seeing. Are we a planet that is regularly being visited by aliens? Or are we a planet in which some powerful group or groups would like us to think that that's what's going on? We don't know. So we have to hold both possibilities open. And the problem is that for each one of these things, you are effectively you are doubling the number of universes you live in, right? So you've got the Kennedy assassination was a coup versus the Kennedy assassination was a tragedy that left democracy intact. That describes two universes. In both of those universes, you have a question about whether or not aliens regularly visit the Earth or somebody wants you to think so, but it's a psyop. Okay? So that's 4 universes. Each time you have one of these unresolved questions of major import, it doubles the number of universes that you have to keep alive so that you can plot your course. If it turns out that it was a coup, but the aliens are real, then what do I do, right?
Now that's a nice little shorthand way of talking about mapping and the relationship between what word shall I use? They're also conflicted. Data points. We'll use that very conflicted word. Between data points. And so, obviously for little Brit Hartley, she or whatever her maiden name was, I don't know. Caffeine, sex, Mormon temple, and then feeling, and all these little data points, and authority. Well, you've got the prophets. You've got the prophets of the LDS Church versus Coca-Cola, and what you see on the screen, and the television, and all of these things sort of coming together and warring and fighting, and you do need to have a map of that which is beneath the surface in order to try and anticipate what you're going to deal with later. And this is, Grim Grizz basically said something. Maybe Brett and Heather are going to find religion faster than Jordan Peterson, because basically they make the argument here what Jordan had been making 8-9 years ago, and Brett was sort of skeptical about, but these old systems, these old mappings, they need to be updated. And what he's here sort of recognizing is that the updating is coming through a fire hose.
Oh, the punchline here is that AI is about, within the next year or so, going to be capable of producing compelling video evidence that will not be detectable.
So now sort of he's had a whole bunch of other apocalyptic fears, and now AI is one of them, and he'll talk a little bit about that.
Just about everything. And so in this mental multiverse, you will maybe be able to avoid embarrassment by not putting your weight on any of the ice, but you can't accomplish anything in that state. And that's what I'm concerned about, that we are going to be collectively put into a circumstance where...
And this is sort of where Britt Hartley's being a mother, she couldn't just be a full-fledged nihilist. I remember early on, I started making videos, and one person who lived not too far away from me said, I got to have lunch with you. I said, okay, we'll go have lunch. And he told me a story. He told me how he was raised in a religious background, an evangelical background. He was in seminary studying for the ministry. And then the whole thing just sort of collapsed. And she has another piece about often the way that education sort of collapses people's faith, because they begin to discover that, oh my goodness, there are patterns, and these patterns aren't just sort of, shot down from above and given by an angel with some tablets and some seeing stones, and oh my goodness, what are we going to do with all these patterns? And maybe there's fingerprints on them, and a lot of the neo-Calvinists in the 19th century actually, Kuyper, Bavinck worked through a bunch of this stuff, at least sufficiently, not ultimately, but that sort of led to all of the Alvin Plantinga and his presuppositionalism, and belief in God is rightly basic, and all of this stuff. So we have all of this stuff sort of being let loose.
Everybody will be afraid to assume enough about the world to actually be capable of acting rationally towards it. And that's a very frightening prospect.
Yeah, it is. It's terrifying. And it does point to the need for actual physical interactions with the world and with people, and to work hard to decrease the percentage of the interaction.
See, now what I would assert is also that this is part of what's beneath the physicalist movement that happened a few centuries ago, where you had this crisis of empiricism versus rationalism. And so the way to resolve it is physicalism, but that was sort of dependent on a rather low resolution epistemology that asserted we see the world as such, and now that's no longer capable, because we recognize that we actually do see the world through a hierarchy of values already, and that hierarchy of values in many ways has been set by these presuppositions, which we may or may not see below, et cetera, et cetera.
One of the clear remedies here is in-person meeting, so that at the point that people's confidence had us take our private discussions about COVID online, is,
I could say estuary, that
I think, reading about that doesn't look fake, and
that the so-called experts probably didn't see coming.
Yep. So in-person is going to be figured out how to think their way through COVID, and found each key given what's coming. The other thing I feel a little bit strange about saying from our starting point. But I wonder, the following thing is true. Amongst the people who we now know well, the people who figured out how to think their way through COVID and found each other and became the movement of COVID dissidents, there is a high degree of religious faith.
Yeah, there is.
It's interesting. And I always took that to imply that there's something about the courage that one gets from thinking, well, there's only so much they can do to me down here on earth, but this matters in some context they can't do anything about.
Mm-hmm.
If you have that faith, it probably emboldens you to face down what's frankly otherwise very frightening forms of coercion. So that's what I always took to be the reason that we see so much religious faith in the COVID dissident community. But I'm wondering also if belief in some higher power narrative does not also provide you an anchor point that doesn't change irrespective of how murky the evidence gets. In fact, specific.
In other words, something prior to evidence, presuppositionalism. It's a presupposition.
Typically because it is not an evidentiary question, right?
Yep.
You inherit a belief in something, or you adopt a belief in something, and that something is, by its very design, impervious to proof.
Yep.
And therefore, as, the world of certainty collapses around you, it still leaves you something in which you can be certain, and not something arbitrary, right? If you made up your own God and maintained a belief in it, it wouldn't be useful. In fact, it would mislead you as often as not. But if you take something that has been proven out over the course of thousands of years, then it at least retains some kind of reliable currency. It has a truth value that is maybe not measured in its description of the universe, but it is measured in its utility over very long periods of time.
Yeah, it's tethered to humanity.
And what's so amazing about this, I don't feel like going back and finding the receipts here, but if you go all the way back to Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, this was what Brett brought onto stage. He said basically, yeah, I get the legacy religions, but they need updating, so they're not functionally useful. And now he's basically saying maybe there still is utility, given sort of the pervasive destruction of worldviews. Presuppositionalist religion is probably going to outcompete all these people trying to navigate through facts and logic. Oh, why not?
So here's my question for you, is if we agree that there is some way in which religious texts carry some kind of value because they allow people to figure out how to navigate their lives in ways that might reduce suffering, reduce the complexity of the choices that they have to make. Presumably, you will agree that that would be consistent with an evolutionary interpretation, that the fact that the stories themselves are functional would provide an advantage to those who were deploying them.
Yes.
So here's the problem. Isn't it then also true that those stories are responsive to past environments? And so the claim that these things might be timeless would be suspect. And in fact, you would expect a spectrum of durability. Some stories would be right in a brief moment. And, okay.
All that's true.
All that's true.
So far, so good.
Well, so far, so good. This is actually, I think, quite excellent then, because what we have is a recognition that there is something to these belief systems that has to do with practical realities in the past, and we also have an acknowledgement that we cannot trust in these things based on simple faith, because even if they can be certain to have worked at some point in the past, we don't know what their relevance is to the present.
Right. Okay. Fair enough.
All right.
Okay. So
In fact, specifically because it is not an evidentiary question, right?
Yep.
You inherit a belief in something, or you adopt a belief in something, and that something is, by its very design, impervious to proof.
Yep.
And therefore, as you know, the world of certainty collapses around you, it still leaves you something in which you can be certain, and not something arbitrary, right? If you made up your own God and maintained a belief in it, it wouldn't be useful. In fact, it would mislead you as often as not. But if you take something that has been proven out over the course of thousands of years, then it at least retains some kind of reliable currency. It has a truth value that is maybe not measured in its description of the universe, but it is measured in its utility over very long periods of time.
Yeah, it's tethered to humanity's past, such that not only has it therefore literally stood the test of time, but it has been with real human beings for generation after generation after generation across not just time but also space. And so, I mean, there's both a therefore there is reality and value there, but there's the question of, oh my goodness, I don't even know if what we're seeing are real people. Like, well, you know that this thing that you have faith in has been believed by real people whom you will never met because they are in the past, whom you will never meet because they are in the past, but they were real. Of that you can be sure. And there is value there that is unchanging.
Yes, and you can imagine at the point that the mental multiverse crisis is at a fever pitch, right? Where you discover some fundamental elements of what you assume to be correct are incorrect, and you're now trying to refactor everything based on, if I'm 3 universes over from the one I thought I lived in, how does that change the combinatorics of all of the various other things that I'm uncertain about? You can imagine being in that state, and frankly, you and I are non-believing members of this dissident community. I think we're kind of structured to deal with that uncertainty and find a different way through it. But you could imagine that for almost anybody, that having something that you don't have to go back and rethink would be, it'd be a godsend.
It'd be a godsend. And so, Nate, my friend, one other thing I wanted to play.
I'm not the only person to have made this journey recently, in response, I think, very generally to our cultural moment. There's been a marked uptick in young people returning to Christian faith. With good reason. There's no other body of thought that can make the case for human nature, as creatures of both flesh and spirit, capable of directing our purpose beyond the mere pursuit of food, sex, money, and status, power. I take great comfort from seeing this sea change. The sex realist feminist movement emerged to challenge the ideological assault on sex dimorphism. It says, no, sex is real and immutable and politically salient. You can drive nature out with a pitchfork and still she comes back. I believe the resurgence in Christian faith represents something similar. It says, no, human nature is real. And it really is sacred. And this is the story from within which it makes sense. Against the Fourth Industrial Revolution, nothing else offers a robust enough foundation to enable us to discern where we may rightly apply our powers of innovation to the benefit of all, and where we must not, without sawing at the branch on which we're sitting. I'm still hopeful that we might be able to develop this kind of discernment, and I'm certain that, if we don't, we'll find ourselves there eventually, having learned the hard way, that you can drive nature out with a pitchfork and still she comes back. So I'll finish by quoting T.S. Eliot, who also discovered faith in the face of immense technological change. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Thank you.
that many people would regard as being totally removed from society. Here we can utilize the meme adoption curve to better understand this dynamic. The meme adoption curve is modeled after the technology adoption curve, which shows how a given technology can go from an obscure novelty to an everyday need. This is identical to how memes spread across a culture. And if we combine the meme adoption curve with a horizontal model of a feudal hierarchy of influence, we can enhance our understanding. For example, within the mimetic feudal hierarchy of Christianity, theologians and religious scholars occupy the highest position in the feudal hierarchy of influence, and therefore would be at the schizo-autist front end of the meme adoption curve. Most Christians don't come into direct contact with the obscure and complex theological debates that the theologians concern themselves with. But downstream from the theologians are priests and pastors, who absorb the teachings of the theologians and simplify them into practical sermons. These are the so-called influencers and would be minor vassals of the theologians. Finally, the church parish who shows up on Sunday and absorbs the sermons are the normies and would be the indirect vassals of whatever theologian their pastor is a direct vassal of. And perhaps...
And a number of you have written to me about the shortcomings of some of his analysis, and fair enough. But it is illustrative of what is happening here. And so part of the power of this woman who comes out with not the most original little worldview of following your passion and discovering your purpose, or where is she? Not her, not him, not them, her. People are following along. This is collective cognition. They are outsourcing some of her cognition. Now you might say, I don't think people should outsource their cognition to her. Well, they don't care what you think. They don't care what I think. They care what they think. And it has to do with vibe. It has to do with look. It has to do with all of these kinds of things. Oh yeah, that caught this one too. Z-Dog MD.
Britt Hartley, welcome to the show.
So glad to be here.
So the way I discovered you, and I was graced actually with what you do, was one of my supporters actually posted something on our internal chat and said, "Hey, have you seen this person? She seems right up your alley." And I was like, "Oh yeah, man. People send me stuff all the time, and it's always something kooky new age stuff or something that I know I understand why they think it might resonate, but it doesn't." And so I went to, it was Instagram. It was something that was transferred from TikTok. And I watched you talk about the nature of reality in a way that like at first I was like, oh yeah, emptiness, no self, whatever. And then the rabbit hole just opened. And the way that you expressed was so amazing that I didn't even go and look at other stuff. I was like, okay, I have to email her right now. I didn't realize you had like 300,000 followers on TikTok and were such a big deal. I was like, no, I just have to reach out. Otherwise, I might have been a little intimidated. I still am. But so I reached out and you were so gracious, immediately responded, and we got on a Zoom call. And I tell you, that was one of the most amazing calls. Like immediately we were talking about these very...
This is the way things go with human beings. You have these little serendipitous connections, and you connect with one person and you like one person and maybe not so much another person, and you have your biases and the combinatorial explosiveness of each of us plus our interactions with one another. And this is the wonderful, crazy, mixed up place that gives us... Somebody had a comment about, I don't know if I can find it. Basically something about, well, what the corner is, and somebody was like, there's no one thing in this corner. You're fundamentally not understanding what we're doing here. What we're doing here is in some ways reducing signal to noise and raising knowability of each other so that we can actually have and discover new ideas and new people and build relationships and have friendships. That's what we're doing. We're in many ways addressing all the way back to Chino, when basically what we're doing is sort of a competitor to AI. Why? Because I know Nate Heil, and I know Rod Hare, and I don't know Dr. Z-Dog, and I don't know Britt Hartley. I know John Vervaeke. I know Jonathan Peugeot. And And that's why we do the in-person meetings, so that things can happen and we can get together, and it doesn't have to be millions of people. In fact, it's better if it's not. It just has to be one-to-one and personal and to know each other. And it doesn't mean that there aren't going to be problems. There are always problems. But you can't live without real connections. And see, I wouldn't find this set of tweets so endearing if I didn't know Nate. And if I didn't know Nate as I know him. And so if Britt Hartley finds this and says, oh, finds my video or finds these tweets, Nate Heil and Paul Vanderklay, they're assholes. I don't want to have anything to do with them. Oh, that's okay. But Nate isn't an asshole. And he just had a reaction. And so one of the things, and I know I get criticized for this sometimes, because one of the things you really want to cultivate in yourself is to not be terribly reactive, to love those who hate you. And it doesn't mean you don't draw lines and kick people out. Some of you know who I'm talking about. But at least tolerate people who, blessed are you when people persecute you. Read the end of the Sermon on the Mount. There's a lot to learn. Anyway, ta-da! Leave a comment.
But it's time, I think, now to turn, awaken from the meaning crisis, to the other side of the argument that we need to make. We need to turn now to not a historical analysis of the genealogy of the meaning crisis, but a cognitive scientific analysis of the machinery, the cognitive machinery of meaning making itself. Jesus starts to emphasize a new kind of love, agape. And this is not the love of consumption or cooperation, this is the love of creation. It's the love that God is demonstrating towards humanity in the way God is an ongoing creation. See, agape is the kind of love that creates persons, the way a parent loves a child. By loving that non-person, you turn it into a person. It's a godlike ability that we have. A person that could enter into a community of persons and find meaning, fellowship, belonging.
In that sense, that's where I see this little corner coming to meet this moment.
Oh, that's I hadn't thought about that.
Because...
So, just let me make sure sorry for interrupting, I just want to get it. Instead of the we being, it's like, no, this little corner is a nexus point of many different Christian groups and non-Christian groups, and that nexus point is perhaps the place we should look for as the thing that will rise to the response. Is that what I'm hearing you say? That's really good, Paul.
And that's what I hear when you say, this is how this little corner should steal the culture.
Midwestuary 2025, August 22nd through the 24th, in Elmhurst, Illinois. A weekend you won't want to miss, with special guests Cale Zeldin, Paul Vanderklay, Rod Dreher, Elizabeth Oldfield, John Vervaeke, and Jonathan Pajot. Midwestuary 2025, the Fellowship of the Spirit. Stay tuned for more details. Visit us at midwestuary.com for ongoing updates.
People error, people king, big, just king, king. Happy, many down, many jack, king from right. Just new king, big, great, can, new, happy. The hours are not what they seem. The hours, people very just king, great king. People error, people king, big, just king, king. Happy, many down, many jack, king from right. Just new king, big, great, can, new, happy. The hours are not what they seem. The hours are not what they seem. The hours, people very just king, great king. People error, people king, big, just king, king. King, happy, many down, many jack, king from right. Just new king, big, great, can, new, happy. The hours are not what they seem. The hours.
All right, that one's a little self-indulgent.
You've heard your neighbor go on about Jesus. They claim their life is renewed. You're happy for them and wonder about it, but surely that isn't for you. Well, what does it mean, and where does life lead, and what they say, could it be true? Well, open your mind, my friend, you may find that Jesus is calling you to. We hear explanations, we try to be patient, opinions the world doesn't lack. They say he's the way, have faith and be safe. It's almost as simple as that. You look for a sign, well, this is the time. The answers have come into view. He'll wipe all your tears and cancel your fears. Well, Jesus is calling you to a strong hesitation for great invitation, a feeling we've all felt ourselves. And now we are gathered at life-giving water. It overflows out of the well. Well, he is the man and he has a plan. You're wondering what you should do. I tell you, arise, repent, be baptized, for Jesus is calling you to. Though life won't be perfect, few things will be certain. We follow with all of our hearts. We walk in the light, we can see with our eyes. We understand only in part. We pick up our cross, we don't count our loss. What else is there left to do? The way it is right, his burden is light. Yes, Jesus is calling you to. We all know there's something that's wrong with existence. The nations are warring with blame. But what if I told you a good guy, he loves you, but sin, it has kept us away. There's got to be more, and you can be sure eternity time flies in two. But as your days in you'll still have a friend when Jesus is calling you to. And when your day's in, you'll still have a friend when Jesus is calling you to.